This is Legal Angle with Emmanuel the Law Holowale. Today, I have a guest with me, a colleague from law school, a colleague as a professional, and also a friend, Nicoke Makeda.
Yes.
Welcome to Legal Angle.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And thank you
I'm
for making
excited.
it. Yes. Can you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Nicoke Makeda. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. I currently live in Columbus, Ohio. I'm in-house counsel at a local insurance company here. And just like Emmanuel mentioned, I had the pleasure of attending law school with him at Capitol here in Columbus. And I'm really excited to talk today about some things that are near and dear to my heart, and that's my travels to Africa.
Oh, wow, that's awesome. Yes, today we'll be talking about Blackness, what it means to be Black, what Black lives mean in the diaspora. So we're talking about African Americans, people from Jamaica, St. Lucia, the Virgin Islands, and what it means to be Black inside of Africa too. And just recently, let's say just about a week ago, Beyonce released the visual album of Lion King themed um, musical, which is
Yes.
called Black is King. You
Yes.
know, Black is King is a celebration of blackness, celebration of African culture, celebration of African spirituality and ancestry. So they've gotten a lot of very positive reviews, especially from Africans in the diaspora, and also some negative reviews. You know, any work of art is going to, attract both positive and negative review. Um, have you seen that visuals? I mean, the visual
No, I
album, Black
haven't
is King.
seen it yet. I've heard a lot
Okay.
about it, but I haven't seen it yet. Yes. Did you get
Yes.
a chance to take a look at it?
Yes, I've taken a look at it. So looking at that visual album, which is, and the current movement among Africans or Black people in the diaspora to try to delve into knowing more about Africa, going to Africa, adopting Africa as an homeland. I don't even know if adoption should be the word because since all Blacks are Africans,
Yeah,
regardless of where you are in the world, but
exactly.
for slavery, voluntary immigration or immigration, all Blacks, wherever they are first African
Yeah,
before they are anything else. So,
yeah,
but there's been this movement now by conscious Blacks in the West and especially in the diaspora who wants to go back to Africa,
yes,
do DNA tests to find out where exactly they're from,
yes.
and actually go to visit and also make Africa a spiritual home. And you have been one of those people that I've seen gone on journeys like that. So
Yes.
we're going to be talking about things like that. So what made you decide to seek or go after your African ancestry?
Gotcha. So that's a huge question, right? One part of it could be what made me decide to go to the continent, and that's
Okay.
almost a separate conversation than what made me pursue my African identity. And I think what
Yes.
originally made me pursue my African identity is I noticed that I was different than a lot of people around me. And so I think that if you're naturally curious, you're going to want to learn more. And I think it's been that journey for me of learning more about what makes me unique, what makes me different. I've learned that it's the fact that it's my African identity and how it shows up in the West. And I think
Hmm.
for me and a lot of the people you were talking about, because last year was the year of return. And I know that Ghana kind of took that and made it a thing. Um,
Hmm.
and tried to track how many people came to Ghana. And I did some research to see what the numbers were looking like. And what I realized is that not everybody went to Ghana. Not
Hmm.
everybody went to Nigeria. Some people went to South Africa. I went to Tanzania. That I think the point was to go back. And I think the reason why not just Nicole, but a lot of people went back is because of that African identity that you needed to be able to go somewhere where you felt that your full self could be recognized and celebrated and not just tolerated. And I think a lot of people are starting to realize that in the West, our African identity isn't celebrated in the way that we would like for it to holistically. You mentioned Beyonce. I think there's a certain comfort in us being entertainers, be it entertainers on a stage or entertainers on a court or on a field in athletics. But I don't think that African identity is appreciated and celebrated when it shows up in other areas in the law. And you think about the numbers of attorneys that we have. That's a challenge. And you know me, I've been trying to increase those numbers just personally and working with groups and others. And the numbers aren't increasing. When you look over the last 20 years, the last 30 years, we haven't reached a critical mass of attorneys yet, right? And so when you start to unpack a lot of these issues, and the same thing exists in medicine and law and almost every career path, you start to see some trends. And I think when you really dig deep into it, the trend is, again, our African identity isn't celebrated. There's actually challenges for us, especially if you hold on tight to your African identity when you show up in these professional environments. And so I think that, and we can talk a little bit more about that, but I think it's that thing that's really encouraging people to go back to the continent, to go back to their roots. And I'm hoping that other people's experiences are like the experiences that I have had in Tanzania. I've never felt so welcomed. I've never felt so at home as I felt in Tanzania, and it just calls me. And so I try to go back as often as I can.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you said you mentioned that African or Black culture is not that celebrated in the West, especially in the United States. Because I remember when I spent the first 20 or so years of my life in Nigeria. So I was all surrounded by being African, the culture, and everything. But one thing is that sometimes you don't realize the beauty of what you have until you don't have it anymore. So when I got to the United States, some of those cultures that I did not appreciate them because they were just there.
Yep.
They were just, I didn't appreciate them. Even in fact, sometimes we have this kind of colonial mentality where that which is African is that which you don't like. Anything that is British, because Nigeria was a British colony, anything that is either English or British, those are the things that we celebrate. So when it comes to even like wearing African attire and going to an African party, if you are a sophisticated Nigerian at that time that I left, it's something you don't want to associate yourself with. Until I got here and I found out that those things that I derided when I was back home are not even here. That's when I started to also appreciate and embrace my African ancestry and culture. So before
something you
COVID,
probably took for granted, right?
I took it for granted. We took them for granted. So before COVID struck, you've been going back and forth, especially like you said to Tanzania and East Africa. What made you decide to go on your first trip? And why Tanzania? And why
Yes.
East Africa?
Yes, my baby sister, Janaea, that's my heart. And she had gone a couple times, her and her husband, and she had a wonderful time there. At his job, he had some friends who were from Tanzania, and they welcomed him, and him and my sister visited, and they fell in love with the place. And so that was something that my sister and I, even as little girls, had talked about, because my mother had cousins who had lived there. And I remember those memories of when those cousins would come home and they would have like big celebrations, like a welcome home party. And I remember specifically they had served goat. I mean, there was lots of different foods, but there was that one goat dish. And all my other American relatives were like, oh, I wouldn't eat that. They'll eat pigs, but they didn't want to eat the goat. And I remember being a kid, being fascinated, like, and eating the goat, and it was so tasty. And so I had that love as a little kid. And I remember my grandmother's brother, he was really into Kiswahili, again, because his daughters were living there and he was learning the language. His grandkids, as they were born there, they were learning the language. And so the kids here, when, the cousins came, we were learning the language. And I remember as a kid learning how to count in Kiswahili and Moja and Bili Tatu and how they made it really fun. And so those things stuck with me, right? And so that curiosity was always there. And it's just like water kind of finds its source. There's so many different things. It was kind of growing up, knowing that I'm different. But again, whenever there was a cultural something going on, my spirit just was drawn to that. When I graduated high school, I went to the University of Michigan, and there was so much culture there. I joined the Black Student Union there. I ended up becoming the treasurer, and we had a pretty significant budget. And we were able to invite some of the scholars at that time, the people who were writing books about culture. I think about Molefe Asante. He wrote a book called Afrocentricity. And so as I started to read and learn, it just fed my desire to learn even more. And so Francis Cress Welsing, Dr. Ben, John Henry Clark, all of these people, I started studying and learning. And the more I studied and learned, it just, it increased my interest. And then I've always had a passion for Kwanzaa. And one of the Kwanzaa principles is a Kiswahili word, Ujamaa. And the president of Tanzania at the time of their independence, Julius Nyerere, he wrote a book called Ujamaa. And so there were all of these things that individually wasn't significant, but I think, Emmanuel, when you put it all together, and then my sister said, let's actually make that our trip, going home, it just came together. I visited Morocco before, that's in Africa, but I didn't feel the same way as I did in Tanzania. I have friends who visited other countries and they're like, well, you know what? You can't just stop there. You got to try other places. But Emmanuel, I have fallen in love with Tanzania. And it was because of, I think, all of those different experiences kind of came together. And as soon as my feet touched down there, I can't explain it. And that's why I encourage people to make that trip, because I'm hoping that other people have that same experience that I had. And I'm trying to encourage others to get over those fears, because we're taught when we grow up here to not like anything African, right? And the darker you are in our society, man, the harder it is. So I grew up being teased. I'm not even going to dignify any of those names that I was called by repeating them. But I'm sure you also, as an immigrant, have been subjected to some of that anti-African sentiment. And it's really because of, again, the media, and we can go talk about the reasons why. But yeah, and so I want to turn that around, because that's not the truth. Right. And I really think that we got to get to the truth, because Africa is wonderful. And it is that place that I think we need to start thinking about and looking toward as we go forward into the future. I think that's what we need to do. I just particularly chose Tanzania. But you know what? I just think the continent overall has a lot for all of us.
You're right. And when you mentioned about having that spiritual connection, I've heard a lot of people, especially in the diaspora, who went back to Africa say that the moment they landed, you just feel like, oh my God, my soul have found its source.
Yep.
It's like you just have that relief. You can't explain it, but you feel it within your soul that I am back home.
I'm back home. And Emmanuel, I'm a mother, and I think about my kids. I have three, sons. They're all men. I can't say black boys. I have three men now that I've raised, and I still, as a mother, I still worry about them. And something that really struck, I tell this story about how I was in Tanzania in a place called Stone Town, which is in Zanzibar, the island of Zanzibar. And I saw these young kids. It was after school. I'm downtown drinking some lemonade by the shore. And these kids are at a pier, and it's after school, and they're taking their shirts off, taking their shoes off, and they're jumping into the water, and they're diving, and they're doing all kinds of fancy stuff, and they're showing off, diving into the water. And they were so free, Emmanuel. No one came to tell them to stop. The police didn't harass them and make them get out the water. And, we're over policed here in the United States. And I'm not just talking about police brutality. I'm talking about the rules, that when it comes to the rules, as Black people, we're expected to follow every rule, and no exception is typically made for us. And so we don't know that freedom that maybe others even feel here, because they're not policed. The book isn't thrown at them the way it is at us. And we can look at the numbers, and, there's facts, there's data to support that. I'm in Tanzania watching these young folks just jump in the water. And the first thing I thought is, that's something that my sons would be doing if they were here. And I also thought, and that's something that if we were in America, I would have the police or the teacher or some authoritarian figure calling me to tell me, get your sons, because these fellas are jumping in the water. And so something happened to me. I don't have grandchildren yet, but if I could redo it, and I think grandbabies give us that chance to redo it, I'm like, I want those same spirited folks, because I know that spirit that's in my sons is going to show up in my grandkids. I want my grandkids to be able to take their shirts off and take their shoes off and be just as free to jump in that water and not be harassed. And I'm tired, Emmanuel, of trying to appeal to the morality of white America. I'm tired of trying to teach and to educate when they've made it very clear, at least the people who I feel need to hear the message, not our allies, right? And I want to make that clear. I'm not talking about the folks who get it. I'm talking about the folks who don't get it and don't want to get it. I'm tired of trying to convince them. So the best thing I can think of is my grandbabies, they deserve Tanzania. They deserve that freedom to be able to jump in the water.
Yes, we did decide to jump in the water. And talking about grannies, tell us about your grandma.
Okay, well, I'm not a grandma yet, but what makes me want to be a grandma is my grandmother. She passed away a while ago, but her spirit just, it lives in me and it encourages me. And so this is part of that push too. She's always pushed me to want to be an entrepreneur. Her thought is, you know what, baby, do your own thing because no one's going to pay you what you're worth. That's not even the capitalist model. That the whole model is we're going to work you because we can extract something from your labor. We can extract a profit from your labor that you won't actually receive the benefit of. And so that's another thing that my grandmother, even though her spirit, she's not with me physically, you know, that's our African identity. Our ancestors are with us always. And then I also know that I am the ancestor of tomorrow. And so I would like for my grandchildren to speak as highly about me and the wisdom that I shared with them. And so I hope that one day my grandkids will be able, while they're in Tanzania, jumping in the water, will be able to reflect back on this video and say that our grandmother also felt the way her grandmother felt, that we deserve to be free in every sense of the word.
Exactly. Wasn't your grandma enslaved?
Well, not my grandmother. So that's an interesting story. My grandmother was not enslaved, but her mother passed away when she was very young, under some very unfortunate circumstances based on the just Jim Crow system and the lack of access for African Americans to sufficient health care. So even though my grandmother's father had means, he was still Black and his wife was still Black. And that still meant a lack of access. And so my grandmother ended up at 5 years old losing her mother and being raised in the Jim Crow South. And so my grandmother would tell stories about those elders who helped her father to raise her. She had older sisters, but she also had, and brothers, but she also had these aunts who had been enslaved, who poured into her. And so, yeah, that's another interesting story because people talk a lot about, oh, Nicole, you see race. Someone said this to me just yesterday. You see race everywhere. And, you know, you just focus on race too much. And slavery was so long ago. And I like to challenge that because my grandmother was raised by people who had been enslaved. And that made an impression on her. And the fact that my grandmother raised me, that means that I was raised by someone who was raised by some enslaved Africans. And so for me, that wasn't a long time ago. But I think the fact that there are so many people who want us to forget, I think that's problematic because even though we're no longer physically in chains, the vestiges of slavery are still with us. They have not gone anywhere because it's enough time hasn't passed yet. We're still talking about the first Black person to do this, the first Black person to do that. So I challenge people all the time, whether they want to be challenged or not, to understand historically, slavery was not that long ago, and it's still in our spirits. Those things need to be reconciled. And again, I think repatriation is a way that we heal our spirits and heal those pains that our foreparents are not even our greats, but our grandparents, right? My own grandmother. That's how I think we start doing this collective healing, is to go back to that source.
I think you're right, because when it comes to slavery, a lot of people that denies it. What I tell them is that you might not have personally owned slaves, but you are benefiting from the legacies of slavery, because the system that we have now still benefits you if you're a certain color and doesn't benefit you if you're Black. So we might not be physically enslaved, but the systemic chain is still there. So do you think the constant fight for validity, for recognition of our humanity, do you think is responsible for this new renaissance of people seeking to go back home? to Africa?
I do. I think that a lot of us have seen our parents who were educated really fight for civil rights. We have studied, we're students of history. We've studied the civil rights movement. We think about the promises that were made. I think another key thing is the fact that we've had our first person of color. I don't know if I'm going to call it Barack Black because, he has a complex genealogy. But person of color for sure. We've had a person of color who was president, and that didn't really shift the country because now we have Trump and his followers. And so I think what people are starting to understand is if Emancipation Proclamation didn't free us, if going through Reconstruction, Jim Crow, the Civil Rights era, even getting a Black president or a Blackish president, if none of those things have shifted things, I think people are realizing that, you know what, it's not going to work. We're trying, we've tried things, and we haven't moved the needle. The numbers haven't moved. That it's going to require more than just a desire to make the past go away and let's just move forward. It's going to require having us go back and heal those wounds and retrace those steps and fix what is broken. And I think the sad part is just the people you talked about who feel like, well, I didn't own slaves, so I shouldn't have to be responsible for any of that healing. I think as long as those people feel that way, they're the ones who actually need to be doing the work. And so the work isn't going to get done. We're not going to move the needle. There'll be a Emmanuel who can squeak through, but for every one Emmanuel, there's probably hundreds of Emmanuels who are just as talented, just as smart. Not to say that you're not talented and smart, but to say that there's just as many. But the fact that the system only allows a one or two to get through, we're never going to get that critical mass. We're never going to find that equity. And I guess just like me, others are tired of asking for it when it's not coming and it hasn't come. And I think that's really where we are, that we've tried all of the different tactics that we could think of to try. And it hasn't worked. And I'm tired of begging.
So why would you call Barack Black? Someone is asking. They're curious.
I think that the fact that his mother is white, he has to honor her. We have to honor her. And I think that to say that one drop of Black blood makes you Black is one of those vestiges of slavery, that one drop rule, because the idea is that you're tainted because you're Black. And I think that Barack should be allowed, and other biracial people should be allowed to celebrate their African identity and their European identity. They shouldn't be forced to choose. But again, that's something that is important in this society because if you have any affiliation with Black, it's like you're just pushed over into this other category. And I know that there are a lot of Black people who feel like, well, Black is strong and that's why, and we're dominant. But I think that we really still, again, have to unpack where that came from. And where that came from was a very racist place to say that one drop of Black blood taints you.
Yes, I think you're right, because even kids that were born into slavery, like Frederick Douglass, he has a white father, but he was raised a slave, a Black. So even if Barack was born during slavery, he would still be working the fields or be a slave in the home. Sometimes those biracial kids were slaves even in their own father's house.
Right.
Which makes it even more complicated. Exactly. Yes, because they were tainted. Even right now, it's very difficult for biracial kids who have both Black and white blood in them, because sometimes they're not accepted by their other race. So they have no option but to, embrace their Blackness.
Right.
Because everyone sees you as Black anyway.
Girlfriends, and this is something we talk about. And the funny thing, I have one, I won't bring her up, but her mom and I are really good friends, and her mom happens to be white and her father was Black. And she's very into her African culture, right? And I think that's probably why we're friends. And her mom is from Ireland. And her mom's like, oh my God, Makeda, what's wrong with this girl? Why does she think she's Black? And my friend is very pale. Her hair is red. But there's something about that African identity that also pulls her. But her mother's like, I don't get it. And I feel that it's really sad that, not that she has to choose, but I think in this society that we're in, there is that pressure for her to choose and to identify with her Black side, despite the fact that she has a very strong and rich Irish heritage. I agree. I can't imagine, but I've heard stories. I can imagine that if she tried to deny her Black side and focus on her Irish side, that she would probably get the wait a minute, you know what I mean? You're tainted because of that Black blood. And that's unfortunate because we're so complex. We should not have to choose. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I think the society, choose for you. You don't have a choice in this. Most of the time you don't have a choice.
you
So
don't.
even if you show up and say, "Oh, I'm white," they'll tell you, "No, you're not."
You're not.
If the cops pull you over, they won't treat you as such. So
Exactly.
the society kind of, makes the selection for you. So you don't have that choice. Then going forward, what does it mean to you to be Black in the United States?
So it's so funny. I was going to try to memorize. There's this video of Nina Simone talking about that Blackness, and the way she says it, she's like that Blackness.
Mm.
And the way she says it to some may be so insulting, but to me, it gives me goosebumps
Mm.
because it means everything to me. It also means that I had to take extra time to work on the camera to make sure that there was enough light for you to be able to see me.
Yes.
That means that
Yes.
very few things are focused on that Blackness. Like makeup, that's a challenge. Video and being seen in pictures. I have to always be careful when I go out with my friends and they take shots. I'm like, don't forget the flash because I want to be seen too in the picture. So when you talk about Blackness, I hope what you're seeing is that I am comfortable with my Blackness. I celebrate my Blackness. I enjoy my Blackness. In that Nina Simone piece, I'll share it with you after the call, and for anybody who wants to check it out. She's saying that that's what compels her too. It's something about that the beauty of that Blackness, and it doesn't mean that I don't have white friends and that I don't see the beauty in Hispanic folks or white folks or Indian folks or whoever. I see I mean, there's beauty across the spectrum, but I'm Black. And a lot of the people that I love and care about are Black, and not just kind of Black, not just tainted with a little bit of Black,
Dark
but
black, chocolate
yeah,
black,
dark Black. And so
dark chocolate black.
before the call, you were sharing that. You were like, Nicole, all this time, I thought you were from Jamaica. And I didn't know you were from Cleveland. I've always loved Blackness, and it's shown up in many different ways. In the 90s, it was the hip hop emergence of, you had your KRS-One and Chuck D and Brand Nubians and Jungle Brothers and X-Clan. You had all these groups who were celebrating their Blackness, and Queen Latifah. And at those times, I really enjoyed being a Black American. But then as time went on, they started adding some reggae to the hip hop. And I'm like, oh, what's this reggae thing? And so then as I started to learn more about how we got here, and the fact that when you talk about enslaved Africans leaving the west coast of Africa in mass, it wasn't until 1619, and maybe a few years here or there, when you started seeing the Africans being brought to United States, but it's not the United States in Jamestown. But over 100 years before that, they had already started bringing them to the Caribbean. And when you look at the numbers, about 85% of the Africans who were brought from Africa to the quote unquote New World were taken to the Caribbean, to South America. And so for me, that journey has been, I think you could almost retrace my steps. Personally, it mirrors us kind of going back, that I did go through the Caribbean phase and I loved everything in Jamaica. And I have some Jamaican kids and they tease me all the time saying, Mom, we're Jamaican, you're Jafaican, right? And I'm like, no, because my curry chicken, you can't mess with it. My jerk chicken, you guys love it. But I think for me, that was what was closer and more accessible to me. And so that's what I gravitated towards. And I think it was me getting into my Caribbean roots and learning about my Caribbean brothers and sisters and studying Marcus Garvey and his idea of repatriation and his idea of having a Black Star Line. I'm like, I want to have a Black airline, a Black Star airline to take Africans back to Africa. But when you look at just the history of our liberation here in the United States, it's so tied to our brothers and sisters who were equally brutally handled as chattel property, just like we were. And so I see that connection that it's one blood and that we're all the same. And so looking at that, it just naturally took me back to the continent and to Africa. And again, but not West Africa. I haven't done a West Africa thing yet. I kind of jumped to the East. And I think for me, that's where humanity began. That was the very beginning. And so when I think about tracing it back, I feel like I've gotten back to where we started.
Yeah, when it comes to, I asked you that question about what it means for you to be Black in the United States, because we came from Nigeria, the new Americans, the African immigrants, those who came here voluntarily, we only recognize that we are Black when we got here.
Oh,
Because yes, being in Africa, Black is not like a racial thing. Black is not a definition because everyone is Black. So you don't even identify as I'm Black. You don't have to say that I'm proud to be Black because you're just Black.
right.
You might be proud to be Yoruba. You might be proud to be Igbo. You might be proud to be Luo. You might be proud to be part of a tribe. But you're not. You can't say you're proud to be Black as a race. So, but that's one of the first cultural shock that I got when I got to the United States. And so sometimes there is that disconnect between what it means to be Black in Africa and what it means to be Black in the diaspora. So when you went to Tanzania, did you notice the difference among the people, or was it something that was nebulous to you?
It's funny because I've had this same conversation with a lot of my African friends. And I guess the challenge is I speak in terms of slavery and chattel slavery because that was our experience. But when I go to Africa, colonialism is slavery's cousin, sister, close relative, right? And so you were talking before about some of the traditions in Nigeria. Your lawyers are still wearing white wigs. They don't even wear white wigs in Europe anymore. Right. I think about the skin bleaching. We talk about the Blackness and your Black identity. Some of the most beautiful women that I've seen on this planet are coming out of, West Africa, Nigeria, Tanzania, and they're bleaching their skin. So I think that even though they don't speak in terms of Blackness or white supremacy and Black being subjugated and less than, I think there's so many things in the culture that show that that's what's going on in the mentality. Because I think that if you try to get the barristers in Nigeria to get rid of the white wigs, saying even the Europeans don't even wear the white wigs anymore, you might lose your life, or you will wish that you had lost your life because you will be made to feel it that no. And I think that we have lots of people who talked about that slave mentality where, as slaves, if you were told, don't walk through the front door, if there was no front door, you go around the back and build a back door because you have the mentality that you deserve to only come in through back doors. And I think that being subjugated, as far as our Blackness being second class, I don't think that is just here in the United States. I think that shows up in Nigeria. Even though everybody is, Black, I still think the vestiges of colonialism still are peeking through, even through those circumstances. So I see that in Tanzania. And so my point is, Tanzania is not a utopia. Nowhere in this world do I think white supremacy hasn't touched. So it's touched there. But I don't think it's as ingrained or as entrenched in those people for the reasons that you mentioned. It's because they still have each other, right? They still have their language, they have their food, they have their culture, they have their dances, they have their songs. So again, what happened on the continent is not exactly what happened here. And so it doesn't show up in the same ways, but I still think that there's these challenges with Blackness that exist everywhere. And I'm seeing even my African brothers and sisters have a resurgence, just like the Americans are having, of their Africanness and their Blackness. And they're trying to rise above those tribalism issues that arguably is what kind of got us here in the first place, is that we weren't unified. Understanding that was something that got in the way of unification of all Pan-Africans. So I think that there's a equal but not the same type of resurgence going on the continent as well, of reclaiming what it means to be African, what it means to be Black, and what it means to have culture, and what it means to celebrate that culture, and what it means to put that culture at the center of who you are and what you do, and not be ashamed of it. I think that's happening everywhere. And I think it needs to, because colonialism touched you guys too.
Yeah, I think it's a renaissance, and with the Black Lives Matter, with social media, Everything that is going on anywhere, it's everywhere in the world. So when it comes to blackness in Africa, it has nothing to do about supremacy. It's just that you're black. That's a fact. Yes. Everything else comes after that, which has to do with tribes and all that. So, but blackness in the United States means that you're an endangered species.
Whew.
Yes, that's the difference. Because being black at home, the police is not going to pull you over just because you're black. You're not going to be discriminated for a job because of your color.
Right.
You are not going to be stopped from jumping in the water because you're black.
Right.
But then when you come to the United States, you realize that you have to follow some rules. You're not like everyone else. So that's what we notice about having to identify as being black and something you can't escape.
Yeah. Do the girls wear natural hair in where you are? Is that a part of the professional identity, or is it the expectation that you better straighten that hair? You better not walk around with nappy hair on your head.
They use it, there's something about growing up in Africa and growing up over here that is kind of different because knowing that your identity or your culture, or well, not some of your culture hasn't been stolen, give you the freedom to choose without thinking that you're appropriating Western culture. But if
Mm-hmm.
your culture have been, if you've not been allowed to practice your culture, to speak your language, like they did to the enslaved and the generations after that, there is this because you have to struggle to get it. There's this love and fight that because you have to fight to really be able to express yourself. So people back in Africa don't have to go through that. So they feel that they have that choice to either keep their nappy hair or straighten it without feeling any guilt.
I don't know. That's my only fear. My only fear is Tanzania and many other places in Africa. It is the fact that I have natural hair, and it's also the fact that I'm not Christian or Muslim. That's something that scares me because Africans are serious about their Christianity. And they don't see that as also a vestige of colonialism or slavery. And we'll get into the arguments about what the history. Well, my grandfather was Muslim, my grandmother was Christian, and not really saying, but your great 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 grandpapa was Yoruba, and there was no Jesus idea. There was a legba, or you know what I mean. So I think that it just looks different. And I think that if we were to kind of unpack it, we would still see some similarities. Because again, I didn't see a lot of women with, natural hair when I was in Tanzania. They were straightening their hair, even if it was really short and broken off. It seemed that having straight hair, however it looked, was better than nappy hair. So I think that those are some things that we're still having to unpack. Having lighter skin was better than having dark skin, even though everybody around you has dark skin. I think there's still that pressure of that standard, especially if you're Jesus that you have on the wall in your church, your God is a white guy with long straight hair. I think that you can try to say that I'm in a place that's where the original people came from. I'm in a place where everybody's black, and you could say that, but I think you have these other things that are weighing so heavily on those ideas that it's kind of pulling the rug from up under that cultural identity and that cultural love. And I don't know, we could talk about that, that maybe
Yeah,
that's the next call.
yeah, I think you're right to a large extent because colonialism in Africa, all it has to do is all about cultural genocide. Because when the Western people came to any kind of Africa, the first thing they give you is that they try to change your religion. They tell you that whatever God you're serving before is demonic, is
Yeah,
satanic. They give you Christianity,
yeah,
or if it's people from the Arab world, they give you Islam. So you have those two competing religions in Africa, Islam and Christianity. And over time, generation to generation, by the time it came to people like me, all you know is all about Christianity or Islam. And a lot of people, if you want to practice your African religion, they say it's demonic, it's satanic.
yes,
So you want to speak your natural language, they said you are speaking like someone who is uneducated. So unless you can speak fluent French or fluent English,
right,
you are not deemed to be educated.
right.
So it's a vestige of colonialization and slavery. So it's been all around the world. And if you look at even people in Latin America, look at people in Mexico, in Ecuador, in Guatemala, they speak Spanish. Those are not their natural
It's not
languages.
their language. That was the
They
language of the conqueror.
Yeah, that was the language of the conquerors. And most, so colonization, slavery, they are all about cultural genocide. And they will train the people before you to really, it's just like how Bob Marley said, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. So you don't need to chain people if you can brainwash them.
There you go.
If
And
you can
none but
brainwash them,
ourselves
you don't
can
need to
free
chain
our
them.
minds. That was the next
Exactly.
line. None but
And,
ourselves.
and none but ourselves can free our mind. And the same thing goes in the Caribbean, in the everywhere you are in the world where you have Black people.
Yes.
Only a few, only a few cultures is still really original. And even those that are original right now, even in the continent of Africa, they are like struggling to really be African because those who are so fundamental in that religion will be fighting them. The government, everyone will make sure they don't exist.
Yep.
Wow.
And so I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I really want to talk about what's next for us as Africans. I'm so
Yes.
excited of this resurgence, of this investment that we have Americans going back to live, to buy homes, to set
To
up
my home.
businesses. And I've had a friend in Tanzania say, you know what, you guys, your money is like worth so much, right? So why don't you come back here to let neo-colonialism kind of work for you? Because if in Tanzania, 2,300 Tanzanian shillings, T shillings for $1, your US dollar can go very far. And so I'm excited about the opportunities that exist for us to help rebuild the continent if enough of us had the wherewithal to know Africa's the new frontier, right? We need to skate to where the puck's going to be. And the puck is going to be in Africa in 2040 and 2060. When you look at the global population, when you look at natural resources, when you look at technology, that's where it's at. And so I'm excited about that. I'm
Yes.
excited about what the future holds.
It is because right now Africa is booming. And
Yes.
like I said, with social media, the world is now just like a local market. Everyone can get anywhere.
Yeah.
Prior to COVID, you've been going back and forth. And I see that you've even started a company to start taking people to Africa for tours. Can you
Yes.
tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So that was, I mentioned that my sister had me go in February of last year. And oh my goodness, I went back in June and took some other folks and told my kids they had to come. I went back in November, took some more folks. I went back in February of this year. And I was planning a June trip and a November trip that I've had to postpone. But so my first planned trip, and I see that you have my website, Miss Makeda, msmakeda.com. We have a trip planned for February of 2022. Yes, there it is. Thank you. And a trip planned for June of 2021. And so my hope is to be able to be, I'm not a travel, and I'm an attorney by trade. I'm not a travel advisor. I'm not a trip, I don't know all of those technical terms that you would use, a travel agent. That's not what I am. I think the best way to describe myself is an escort or a guide. And my thought is I've built friendships there. I'm learning the language, but I have folks who speak really good English and Kiswahili. And so my thought is let me help you overcome the fears. If it's the fear of your safety, we got folks who will, take good care of you. If it's your fear of the language and not knowing the language, we'll teach you some Kiswahili. But fortunately, enough folks there will speak English for you to be able to get around. And if it's the cost, we will help find ways to make affordable trips. And so that's really what our goal is to make trips affordable. There's not really a profit margin in this. It's really about trying to just put the trip together, helping people understand, here's what you can do. We only do 5-star hotels. So I do try to focus on safety and not shocking people too much because I've stayed in some non-5-star hotels and it was culture shock. So we do 5-star hotels, but we're able to take groups back and allow them to go on safari and go to Dar es Salaam and get the city life and to see that Africa has all of those things that all the creature comforts that you have at home, that they're there. And then the island of Zanzibar. I'm so in love, Emmanuel, with the island of Zanzibar and the white sand beaches. And they have this wonderful music festival, the Sauti za Busara, every year. And so I want to be able to share that with the people who I I love and I care about. And I want to help them overcome those fears, because a lot of those fears are irrational. Now, I always have to put the disclaimer out there that I can't guarantee your safety, that it's a inherently dangerous activity to go travel internationally and go to the other side of the world. And I can't guarantee your safety, but I can do everything that I can to make you sure you have a memorable trip. And I mean, I've gone and come back several times and I'm still in one piece. But my point is, there's a lot of fun to be had. There's a lot that you can do. And I really want to be able to show people that side of Africa. You still got to be smart. You still got to take care of yourself. You still can't do, off the wall kind of things on my trip, because I want everybody to come back in one piece. But I think there's so much fun that can be had. And I want to show people that. And I like the idea. And so this is the reason for it all. I want to encourage people to think about retiring in Africa, right? A place where you've been saving up your money, and it's so expensive for our elderly to grow old in dignity here in the United States. We don't know what the Social Security system is going to be like in 20 years and 30 years. And so my thought is, your savings, your retirement dollars can go so much further if you consider retiring somewhere where it's warm and where it's beaches and it's natural and healthy foods for you to eat, and it's beautiful brown people willing to love on you and help you and take care of you. And you can do so and live like a king or a queen at a fraction of what it will cost you to do that here. So my goal is to try to encourage more of us to be able to live in old age in dignity and die in dignity. Because for me, I can't die here, Emmanuel. I have to die on the continent. Not anytime soon, but
That's a great idea. So it's all about cultural immersion, and like, how much do you charge for those trips? What's the average?
So
What's the price range for those who are interested in making
so
those
so many
trips?
unknowns.
And for how long?
My fear is COVID is making this uncertain, right? But if the past is any indication of what the future will look like, that's kind of how we put our trips together. We're constantly monitoring the flights and constantly monitoring the accommodations to make sure that the trip that we're offering is a reasonable trip. And as of right now, I have several people who agree with me that this seems reasonable. It looks like it's going to happen. I have lots of folks who have signed on. And again, the more people, the cheaper it is. So I have a very large group going in February of 2022. And so we're able to offer them right now, if all things go as planned, $2,500. And that'll cover 9 days on the ground. That'll cover their airfare from Ohio to Tanzania. I know, right? Their accommodations, a day of safari, an opportunity to visit the Maasai, an opportunity to go to Zanzibar after that safari and eat, lobster and shrimp on a white sand beach in Zanzibar. So we've packed quite a bit into the trips, but you can get all the details on my website. $2,500, and it covers almost everything. But again, the details are there. And my goal is for you to be able to go there, have a good time. And we have one deal for the February 2022 trip. We have a payment plan. If you make all of the payments, we'll give you $500,000 in Tanzanian dollars, right? So you can ball out while you're in Africa. Black is king, and you'll be able to live that lifestyle. Again, all in jest, $500,000 of Tanzanian dollars is not quite $500,000 in US dollars. But the thought is thinking about that and getting people to think about Africa in a different kind of way, that you can go to, as an American, you can go to Tanzania and actually spend $500,000, not dollars, but shillings. I want people to start kind of, indicting their fears in the indoctrination and seeing that A, you can't afford the trip. B, you can have a lot of fun and have a A1 experience, and you can also ball out again on a budget.
Yes, even that's really affordable. $2,500 for a 2 weeks trip, round trip. That's really affordable. And talking about how people view Africa, a lot of people see Africa, they think Africa is still in the Stone Age, no technology, no great buildings. They call it a jungle. Even recently, when you got back, one of your coworkers, greeted
Oh,
you
you're
with
back from
welcome
the
back,
jungle.
welcome back from the jungle. Yeah. How
And
did
that
you
broke my
handle that?
heart. That broke
Yes.
my heart, because I thought that I was representing something else. I thought that, my profession is important. My job is important. I love what I do. I work in financial services. I love what I do every day to help our policy owners, our contract owners, um, make sure that my company is making good on the promises that we've made to folks, and we do a good job doing that. And I thought that I was showing up in such a way that people knew that I was very proud of where I was from. So for someone who really cared about me to say that in jest, it let me know that, or whether it was in jest or not, it let me know that we still have a lot of work to do,
Yeah.
because people still have these negative impressions of Africa, and all the creature comforts that we have here, they're there. If you want to drive a Mercedes, man, you could drive a Mercedes there, and I bet you can find a million mechanics who will keep your car running, right? If you want to eat good, clean food, and if you want to live a vegan lifestyle, man, you can really eat good food there. If you want to stay in a 5-star hotel, you can do so. 5-star accommodations, you can do so at cheaper than you can here. So I'm always challenged when people have these negative views of Africa, because I'm always asking, who told you that? Where did you get that from?
Yeah. I think it's the propaganda of the West to entrench slavery, colonization, and things like that. So when people think that a place is a jungle with people who are there jumping on trees and back and forth, so they're less likely to want to go back. So
Yep.
imagine telling that to an enslaved. You can tell an enslaved person, you're lucky to be here. We're giving you salvation. Your brothers are in Africa, they're in the jungle. What I found funny is that wooded areas in the United States or in England, they are not called jungles. So
Yep.
why do they call wooded areas in Africa jungle?
Yep.
So I
And
think,
that's interesting to me. Now, there are people who live, I like to describe it, they live close to the earth, right? So you will find people in Africa who live close to the earth, because even though Tanzania is a socialist country, I think it's funny when you hear people say they're trying to turn America into socialism and Bernie Sanders is talking about socialism. And I'm like, well, we're already really a socialist country. We have a social security system. We have all these social safety nets. You got food stamps, you got, stimulus payments, you got all of these things in our society. You don't have those things in true socialist countries. They don't have a welfare system in Tanzania. So you do have some people who live close to the earth. But I mean, we have people here in America who live close to the earth. There's some people in some of our more rural areas and our more Appalachian areas who you may see not walking with shoes on, who live close to the earth. Black people, white people, we have all kinds of people, Asian people, Latino people who live close to the earth, even here in the United States. So I think it's very unfair to try to single out that particular demographic in Africa when we have a very similar demographic here in the United States or Europe or wherever you go, right?
yeah, yeah. I think it's just the highest standard placed on Black people anywhere and everywhere in the world. So when you're Black, you just need to be much more cleaner, you have to be much better to you have to fight for everything you got.
I'm
Whether
exhausted
you're
by that.
Yeah,
That's
whether you
exhausting.
are educated or not, whatever, you have to fight for everything, you know. Wow. So how do you handle being Black or a Black woman as a professional
Oh my goodness. See, there
in
you
this
go.
culture?
See, there you go. um, I, I guess I don't handle it well because I'm trying to move to Tanzania. um, I am very appreciative of the fact that I got a chance to get a law degree. I'm very appreciative of the organization that I've been able to work for, because I've been able to make enough money to be able to support my family and expose them to the things that I felt they needed to be exposed to. But at the same time, I realized that it's not likely that my children are going to have the same opportunities in the law or any other profession that I've had, right? And that's, I think, the thing that hurts the most, that I don't have the ability to bring on who I would like to work with within my organization. I don't have the ability to make decisions in my organization that I work at. And I think you get to the point where you realize I have a lot to offer, but if people aren't open to what you have to offer, then it's like that idea of what happens to a dream deferred, right? And I think that if I had to end that poem, What Happens to a Dream Deferred, it moves to Tanzania. How about that? It goes to that place where it is appreciated. It goes to a place where those talents are appreciated. And it's not to just single out any one organization. I think the point is it's systemic, right? It's that we have systems in place that don't value necessarily how I may show up, right? So maybe passive aggressiveness is not the way that I, care to communicate. Maybe I like to be more direct. And so I have these ideas that you can say what you mean without being mean, right? And there should be a space for that. And so when you talk about that Blackness and that culture, and I like to wear my hair, natural. I like to wear it how it grows out of my head. I like to wear, adorn myself with colors and things that are unique to that particular culture. That's not a part of the dominant culture. And so you could be a person who subjugates that part of yourself so that you can fit into the dominant culture, or you just come to realize that the dominant culture has its own way that it wants to do things. And, do you want to keep kind of knocking your head up against that brick wall of trying to change systems and structures that were never built to include you and are not real quick to want to make any changes to include you and how you would show up and add the value that you would add? And so, yeah, I think that for me, I've gotten comfortable with the idea that you can't change. You can only do what you can do, I guess.
Yeah. You can't change the system because the system has been built even before you, and the system will still remain the system even after you. And that's a lot of challenges that a lot of people face within the corporate culture. You have to make yourself small to accommodate the system because the system will not accommodate you, or the system will not accommodate your culture. Wow. I think we can
to do other things. Me and my sons have gone into business together. And so we just bought a building. And so we've been celebrating that. I haven't kind of announced it yet. I think this is probably the first time I've mentioned it in public.
Congratulations.
Yes. And so we're working on getting that space together. They call it the Sun House. And they have these wonderful plans for that space. And I think for me, that's really been the most important thing, because what I've learned and what I want more folks to learn, and I guess what's next for me, is really trying to teach financial literacy. This idea that the race is not about trying to get the greatest income. The race is, how do you take whatever income you have and turn it into assets? Because if I were to die tomorrow, my children won't be able to show up at my job and keep making that paycheck. That paycheck is gone. But if I can find a way to turn my income into assets, I can pass those assets on to my children. And if those assets happen to be assets that also not only increase in value, but produce income, then not only will the asset and its value that can increase over time pass on to my kids, that income can also go on to them. So in case I'm not there to keep generating it, my legacy can continue on. So if you were to ask what's next for me is my legacy, that right now I'm thinking about my children and my grandchildren that aren't even born yet.
Thank you. I'm going to end on this quote. This is what I normally tell people. I'm like, don't talk about what you're bringing to the table. I'm not bringing anything to the table. I am building my own table. And once I build my table, I can do whatever I like to do with it. So I'm not fighting to be at the table. I'm building my own table. Thank you, Nicole, for joining us this Saturday. It's been wonderful talking to you. I know if we continue, we can go on for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. I think I'm going to have you come back and just show if you don't mind.
I would love to. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. This has really been a wonderful experience for me.
All right. And for those who are watching and are listening to us, thank you for joining us today on Legal Angle with Emmanuel De La Olawale. I'll be back with you hopefully next week, and we'll have another good time. Thank you, and have a good day.
Yes.